There are people that are going to be so excited to be able to do something nice for you, and they won't know that that opportunity even exists if you don't ask for help to make them aware in the first place. What if I told you that the thing that you're chasing, the perfect romantic relationship, financial success, isn't what you actually want? I've spent 20-ish years figuring this out, and I'm going to do my best to save you the decades of frustration and suffering that I experienced in the next 14 minutes or so. So this is a little hard to talk about, but for years and years, I dated men who did not treat me well. And I would just manage to align with them. I would find them. They would come out of the woodwork without any sort of conscious intention to do so. And I didn't understand this at first, but eventually I realized that it all came back to the way I'd been treated within my family. But here's what I learned. It's really true that we don't have to be defined by the way others treat us, even when it goes back so far as our family of origin and it's something we've been conditioned to accept since birth. What I know now is that I'd grown up in a narcissistic family structure. The way it usually works is a narcissist will partner either with another narcissist or with an enabler. In my case, my dad was the narcissist and my mom was the enabler. If the couple has 2 or more children, they tend to turn one child into the scapegoat and one into the so-called golden child who can do no wrong. In my family of 4 kids, my next brother was the golden child and I was the scapegoat kid. I didn't know about any of that until I was in my late 20s and was already a couple years into therapy. I remember I relayed a story about my family to the therapist. I don't even remember what the story was exactly. And the therapist was like, what do we know about scapegoats? And when I started researching narcissism and family structures, we were like a textbook case. The scapegoat is usually like the most sensitive kid, the truth teller in the family structure, and they're trying to speak up and get the family to deal with its dysfunction. But the narcissist winds up training the rest of the family to blame that child for things that are not that child's fault. And so because I'd been the scapegoat kid in the family and was just used to being treated with hostility, I ended up dating men who were also narcissistic and abusive and treated me poorly. And that's the thing I want to share with you regarding patterns that we need to heal. Even if we know we don't like them, if we know intellectually that it's unhealthy, until we're able to do the inner work to heal that trauma and release it for good, we keep finding people who repeat those patterns in our lives, who are wounded in similar ways to what's familiar to us, because that's just how manifestation works. We really can free ourselves from that through genuine forgiveness. And it can happen in layers that peel back over time. And as we heal that, we can start manifesting people who truly understand and appreciate our inherent worth. It took a long time, but from that I learned perhaps the most important lesson that I think I can share with you today. The only way out is in. When I was 28, I went to my first ever silent Vipassana meditation course. It was 10 days long. And at that time in my life, I was consuming things all the time. I was consuming travel and experiences and a lot of alcohol. At the surface, I saw this as another experience that I wanted to try. But it turned out that going to that course was the most wonderful thing that I have ever done. It completely transformed my life. During that first course, a lot of the trauma that I've been carrying came on the surface, and it showed itself as physical discomfort. I felt a lot of rage for days and days. Like, that was the theme of that first course that I can remember. And a lot of that anger was directed at an old boyfriend who had SA'd me multiple times. And a lot of that anger was directed at my narcissistic father as well. Another crazy thing that happened at that course was that the boyfriend who had SA'd me, I had completely repressed that memory, y'all, for like over 10 years. And it came back in during the Vipassana course. And now I understand that at the time it was so traumatic, my mind just had to compartmentalize it and split it off. But by the time I was sitting this first Vipassana course, I was more equipped to allow it to surface, to feel all those negative emotions, and then to release them for good. It was amazing to me because within a few years, I think it was like my 4th Vipassana course, I remember being at that course and the memories of the SA coming back in. And I was astonished because it was just like, I didn't have any negative emotions associated with that event anymore. All of the grief, the rage, the pain, the sense of powerlessness, it was all gone. And I finally felt that I understood what forgiveness actually is. I grew up in like a Christian household and I knew that the Bible said that we're supposed to forgive, but I never understood how to actually do that when someone had done something really, really horrible. But through Vipassana, I came to understand sooner or later, all of the negativities will leave you. They'll release for good. And then genuinely all that's left is compassion and forgiveness and love. You're no longer carrying that anymore. You're free. So I grew up in a really small town. I went to a bad public school. There were 116 people in our graduating class, and I think 9 students were already pregnant by graduation day. I went on to Duke University and people acted like that was a big deal. Not long after college graduation, I got my first job as a pro stock trader. And this is the thing. I didn't even question the idea that if I worked hard and performed well at my job, that I would be fairly rewarded. That's what they taught me all through school for all of those years and years that we were forced to go. But almost immediately I started to experience discrimination at work. I was always the only woman or one of a couple women. And one job in particular, I found out that I was paid a lower base salary than all of the men who started at the same time that I did, despite negotiating the starting salary, having a better educational background than any of them had. And also by that time already having experience as a profitable trader. I knew how to make money trading. And only one of the men that started with me could say that. When we later got bonuses that were actually based on performance, mine was larger than the rest of the traders I started with, and I was proud of that. The entire experience made me realize like, oh, I was brought up to believe something that is not true. This system, this financial system, is not a meritocracy. It does not necessarily reward hard work. It doesn't necessarily pay you what you're told to believe you should be paid based on the education you got, all the work you bring into starting at a position. I started to recognize that the so-called American dream wasn't real, at least not by the time I was coming up in my career. So I understood that we needed a better system altogether to transcend the old financial system. And eventually Seeds was born, but more on that in a bit. The Vipassana taught me another super important lesson that I want to impart to you. Everything really is impermanent. Our physical bodies, our thoughts and feelings. Even when the emotion is a really strong, deep grief, sooner or later, it's gonna change. And over time, and it may take a lot of time, it will gradually start to release. So when that pain is especially bad, when it's intolerable, I found that it can be so helpful to remember that. And also understanding how to practice Vipassana itself. I've learned that doing that in those moments makes those moments themselves less painful. And then over time, everything is impermanent. Sooner or later, it's going to release if I can just make it through that moment. And as I started to heal from, the trauma of earlier experience when I was younger, I started to learn another important lesson. And therapy helped with this as well. Setting boundaries is so important. And when you're truly doing it for your own highest good, it's also by definition going to be for the highest good of others. If you grew up conditioned to be a people pleaser like I was, and like so many women I know are conditioned to become, setting boundaries can feel so extremely difficult to do. And in my own life, I tried to do that for many years, and I tried everything else I could think of as well with my narcissistic family of origin. But at a certain point, decades into putting all of this emotional labor into trying to heal the family structure, I realized that the only option that was remaining was going no contact. And that seems so impossible, so unthinkable even. But after I had done it, my life almost immediately improved. And I think it was, because energetically speaking, that huge drain was no longer sucking away my life force. Like I'd set the boundary, and then I suddenly had all of this space and all of this room to devote to more positive pursuits. My financial life also completely changed. Within a year, I was living in this Hollywood Hills mansion, and I know for a fact it had to do with setting those boundaries with my family as well. And the other beautiful thing about that was that I heard through the grapevine that this had actually had a positive impact on my narcissistic father as well. I had removed myself from the dynamic as the scapegoat kid, as like the punching bag for the rest of them, and especially for him. And so I was told by others that he started to look inward more. And the other beautiful thing about that was by that point, I was no longer attached to him behaving a certain way. I'd spent so many years, wishing he would stop treating me the way that he did, that he would actually be the loving parent that I had always hoped for. And then I went through that grieving process because it was clear that that just wasn't going to happen in this life. And that's the thing about being attached to a certain outcome, especially when it surrounds another person's behavior. We can experience so much grief because of that attachment, particularly when it's something completely beyond our control. But then sort of the paradox there is that when we let go of that attachment entirely, it often frees up the energy so that that shift does take place. My dad died over 3 years ago now. I guess he refused to get the COVID vaccine and he died of COVID pneumonia at age 67. And I have this additional peace of mind knowing that in doing something that was truly taking care of myself, it was also an act of kindness that helped him on his own spiritual and self-improvement journey, wherever that ends up taking him after this life. And none of this growth, the positive improvements I was seeing in my life, would have been possible if I hadn't asked for help. So that's another important lesson that I want to make sure to share with you today. Asking for help is a kindness to ourselves. We're also creating this opportunity for other people to do something wonderful for us. There are people that are going to be so excited to be able to do something nice for you, and they won't know that that opportunity even exists if you don't ask for help to make them aware in the first place. I know that asking for help can be one of the bravest things that a person can do, especially in the world we live in, which has this emphasis on self-interest and individualism, particularly in the West. It's caused a lot of problems that would be mitigated if we could just ask for help from those around us. And that's part of what Seeds is about, and I really had to learn this lesson myself around the time I went no contact with my family. I've been working on Seeds for many years and it had helped people in 20 some countries by that point, but I was still so conditioned to think that I had to be serving others that it didn't even occur to me to use Seeds to ask for help myself, even though that's what it's for, when I was on the verge of eviction from my studio apartment. But then by a certain point, I didn't have anywhere else to turn. I didn't have like a romantic partner with a job or whatever. So I redeemed a seed to ask for help. And it was so humbling and I felt so much gratitude and I had the funds that I needed to pay my rent within like 24 hours. And then the other thing that was beautiful about this, I made a whole video about it if you feel like watching, is that my friend C had given $10 toward my need at the same time. He was having his own financial challenges and that's what he could afford. And when you give through Seeds, you get Seeds cryptocurrency and thanks. And within like a year and change, I think, that $10 worth of seeds that he'd received because he was kind was worth something like $2,700. So that's what Seeds is offering, this opportunity to build wealth because you were kind to somebody else. And doesn't that make for a better economic structure than the zero-sum transactional manufactured scarcity economic system? I really think that it does. I'm hopeful that we can share more about it as a social revolution. Seeds is a social revolution to help us get out of the trap of the old economic system. We shouldn't have to trade our time for money working jobs that we hate to get the money that we need to survive. And so Seeds is about helping us transcend that. And that brings me to the last lesson that I want to share with you today. There's this quote that I reference all the time from Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. As a feminist, as somebody who considers myself to be an activist, who has worked for years to try and forward various social causes, I've spent a lot of time and emotional energy feeling angry, frustrated, hopeless, having the sense that the power structures in existence just aren't going to shift in my lifetime. And eventually I realized that that form of resistance, that emotional resistance, and the actions that came from it were actually perpetuating those old systems. And it's healthier to instead point my efforts toward growing a new kind of system that can transcend the old. The old system teaches us to think that more money, more quote unquote success is what's going to make us happy. These external pursuits are what are going to make us happy. But what I've learned in 20 years is that truly we find that within ourselves. Late stage capitalism clearly is not working anymore, if it ever did. Most of us are wage slaves. We're enriching this oligarchy that has gotten so corrupt and so power hungry that it is now disrupting American democracy as we know it. And as we're healing, as we're becoming kinder to ourselves and therefore also to others, we really can come together to build new systems that will transcend the old. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I appreciate you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.